My name is Lorna Mae Bishop. I'm 68 years old, and some nights, when the wind presses too hard against the windows, I still wait for footsteps that never come. People think waiting is a passive thing, but it isn't. Waiting is work. Waiting eats your bones, your voice, your memory, especially when you're waiting for someone who promised they'd come back. I live alone now, just me and a garden I barely tend, and a kettle that screams louder than I ever did. Folks around here call me Miss Bishop, with that mixture of pity and politeness reserved for old women who wear long skirts in summer and keep their curtains drawn in daylight. They don't know my story, not really, just whispers. She lost someone. Her brother ran off. She was mixed up in that church over in Crosswell, the one with the fire. But no one ever asks, not directly. Maybe they're afraid I'll tell them the truth, because the truth is heavy and ugly and slow. But I'll tell it anyway, because you should know what happens when a promise is broken long enough. It becomes a cage. I was born in 1956 in a sliver of land called Dawson Hollow, one of those nowhere towns that doesn't appear on maps, but everyone knows where it is when they need someone to bury a secret. 3 churches, 1 gas station, no library, no one left, except the people who didn't know how to leave. I was the youngest of 4, 2 sisters, both married off by 16. One still sends me Christmas cards with verses from Psalms and no return address. The other died in a trailer fire, or maybe she ran. I never did get the truth. But it was my brother Thomas who mattered most. Only 1 year older than me, but already tall and wild-eyed, with calloused fingers that strummed a cracked guitar like they were trying to carve open heaven. He was the only good thing in that house. Daddy was drunk by noon most days, cruel by sundown. He believed in belts, in silence, in the power of a locked door. Mama, well, she was a different kind of ghost. Her body moved, but her spirit had long since sunk into a bottle of Robitussin and a radio that played gospel from morning till dusk. Thomas used to say, "We got born to the wrong people, Lorna, but that doesn't mean we gotta stay with them." And I believed him, because when he looked at me, I didn't feel like trash. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was somebody worth saving. I still remember the day he left. I was 12. He had just turned 17 the week before. It was late August, the kind of thick, humming heat that makes your skin feel like it's trying to leave your bones. We were sitting on the back porch, legs dangling over the steps, chewing on sunflower seeds and dreaming out loud. He said, "I'm going to Nashville, gonna make music, or at least find a job that doesn't smell like sweat and cow piss." I laughed, because that was the closest we ever got to joy. And then he turned to me, real serious, and said, "When I get settled, I'm coming back for you. You hear me? You wait for me. I'll come and get you out of here." I nodded. I didn't cry. I wanted to be brave, like he always told me I was. The next morning, I woke before the rooster, just to watch him leave. He didn't have much, a torn duffel bag, a few bucks folded into his back pocket, and that guitar slung over his shoulder like a second spine. He walked down that dirt road without looking back, kicking up little clouds of dust with each step. And I stood there, barefoot in my nightdress, the porch splintering under my toes, holding onto those words like they were scripture. I'll come back for you. And then he was gone. I thought he'd be back in a week, then a month, then after Christmas. I kept a bag packed under my bed, one dress, a comb, my toothbrush, and a photo of us from when I was 9 and he was 10, arms around each other like we owned the world. But Thomas never came, and while I waited, something else came instead. His name was Pastor Reuben, and he said God had spoken my name. Pastor Reuben was the kind of man who made women sit straighter and men tuck in their shirts. Not because he asked them to, but because his presence pressed down on the room like humidity in August. He wore black suits even in the summer and always carried a leather Bible under one arm like it might jump out and start preaching without him. He wasn't from Dawson Hollow. He came from somewhere north. I never knew where, just showed up one spring with a smile full of teeth and sermons that made the old folks weep and the young girls stare at their feet. Within a month, he'd built his own chapel at the edge of town. Not a church, no, a chapel. Said the word church had gotten too dirty. Said God was calling for something pure, something new. Mama fell fast, quicker than the drink. She started putting on lipstick for Sunday service, stopped cursing under her breath, started humming hymns while boiling potatoes. I should have known then something was shifting, but I was too busy waiting for my brother to send a letter, too busy counting the days since he left. I remember the first time Reuben looked at me like I wasn't a child. It was after evening service. I had stayed behind to sweep the floor while Mama talked to the other women in hushed tones by the altar. He walked past, slow, like he was inspecting something. "You're blooming," he said. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even look up. I just kept sweeping, even though my hands had gone still. He stepped closer. I could smell the oil on his skin, the same kind they used to anoint the sick. His voice dropped low, like he was talking to God and me at the same time. God's got a plan for girls like you, quiet ones, obedient. Then he walked out, left me standing there with my stomach twisted and my heart beating too fast. The next morning, Mama told me I was to stop school. God's work is more important than arithmetic, she said. I cried. She slapped me. After that, I stopped asking questions. I started wearing long dresses, stopped cutting my hair, memorized verses until they made a home behind my teeth. We moved into the chapel compound that summer. Just me, Mama, and a handful of others who called themselves the Cleansed. They wore white at sunrise and red at sunset. They fasted on Wednesdays and prayed until their knees bruised. I was 13, and I was told I was chosen. Chosen for what? I didn't yet understand, but I would soon. And by then, it would be too late to run. because there were no roads out of that chapel, only doors that locked from the outside. At first, it was little things, the way they took our shoes at the entrance, said the ground was holy and we had to feel it beneath us, like Eve before the fall. The way meals got smaller, simpler, just broth and a hunk of bread. Reuben said hunger cleared the mind, made us humble, the way no one was allowed to speak without permission. Even laughter needed approval. If you smiled at the wrong time, you scrubbed the prayer hall with a toothbrush. And then there was the curtain. It hung in the back of the chapel, behind the altar. Heavy, dark velvet. Strange, really, for a man who preached about light. Nobody talked about what was behind it, but the older girls flinched when it moved, and the boys were never asked to go near it. Just us girls, just us. I asked Mama once, whispering so soft I wasn't sure the sound even left my lips. What's behind the curtain? She didn't answer. She just pressed her palm flat against my chest and said, "Obedience will save you. Not God, not faith. Obedience." The first time they took me behind it, I had just turned 14. My birthday wasn't marked. No cake, no candles, no cards. Just a nod from Mama and another verse to memorize. That night, Sister June came into the dormitory, woke me with a gentle shake and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Pastor wants to see you." That was all she said. She led me barefoot through the hallway. The wood was cold, splintered. Every step felt like a test. When we reached the curtain, she stopped, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and whispered, "Be still, be grateful." Then she left. I wanted to run. My legs were already tightening, but the fear sat on my chest like a hand pressing down, whispering, "Don't." The curtain opened from the inside. Reuben stood there in white robes, his Bible in one hand, a glass of something dark in the other. He smiled, and I knew something was about to be taken from me that I would never get back. I don't remember all of what happened. The mind is funny like that. It shuts doors. It burns pages. It does whatever it takes to survive. But I remember the weight of the oil, the sting of his breath, the way he said my name like it belonged to him now. When it was over, he told me I had been blessed. He said pain was part of cleansing, that I was one step closer to holiness, that I was no longer a girl. When I came back to the dormitory, I didn't cry, not because I wasn't broken, but because one of the older girls, Ruth, 16, hollow-eyed, caught my gaze as I walked past. And she shook her head just once, slow and soft. That was our language. Don't cry, they'll punish you worse. I laid down on my cot, still wet with sweat and oil, and stared at the ceiling until the wood stopped spinning. And in the darkness of that room, I whispered the only thing I still believed in. "Thomas, where are you? You said you'd come back for me." But silence was the only thing that answered. And it sounded a lot like God. The seasons changed, but nothing else did. By the time I turned 15, I'd been behind the curtain more times than I could count. Sometimes it was just him. Sometimes Sister June stood nearby, humming hymns while it happened. Sometimes they made me sing after, said the sound of my voice made the pain worthwhile. I learned how to leave my body without leaving the room. That's a skill, one you don't forget. You tuck yourself into a corner of your mind, somewhere warm and numb, and wait for it to be over. I stopped asking about Thomas, not because I gave up, not fully, but because hope had teeth in that place. If you showed it, someone would bite. So I buried it, but I never let it die. Instead, I started watching, listening, counting, doors, windows, shifts in the guards. How often the supply truck came, when Sister June's medicine made her sleepy. I couldn't escape, not yet, but planning made me feel alive. It gave me something that Reuben couldn't take from me. That spring, I started bleeding too much. It came like a flood, soaking through my dress in the middle of evening prayers. I remember the way the congregation gasped, not out of concern, but disappointment, like I'd insulted God by leaking in front of him. They took me to the infirmary, really just a storage closet with a cot and a bucket. Sister Alma checked me, muttering verses under her breath. I was pale, dizzy, couldn't keep food down. She looked at me with something almost like pity, said I needed real help, a hospital, but Reuben refused, said if I died, it meant God had made his choice. So I didn't die, not because of faith, but because Ruth snuck me raw eggs and aspirin when no one was looking. She sat beside me all night, braiding my hair and whispering stories about lakes and airplanes and cities with streetlights that never burned out. I was gonna be a nurse, she told me once. I nodded. I didn't say what I was gonna be. I didn't know anymore. One night, Ruth didn't come back. They said she left to serve God elsewhere, but I found her bracelet under her cot stained with blood. I never saw her again, and that was the first time I truly hated God. Not doubted, not questioned. Hated, but even hatred wasn't enough to set me free, because the only way out was through fire, and fire was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The fire didn't start in the walls. It started in whispers. There were rumors, barely words, more like fragments, that a girl had escaped from another compound across the river, that she made it to a gas station with blood on her dress and a name scratched into her arm, that the police came and asked questions. Reuben called it blasphemy. He stood at the altar, eyes burning hotter than any flame, and said the devil was testing us, said traitors were among us, said flesh must be pruned for the spirit to blossom. The next morning, 3 girls were gone. One of them had braided my hair the night before. The fear was thicker after that. You could taste it in the food, feel it in the air. People stopped making eye contact. Even Mama kept her head low and her prayers quieter. And then one night, just after the sun dipped low and the hills turned blue, Reuben made an announcement. We are entering the final week of purification. I didn't know what it meant. Not then. But I could feel the end coming, like a storm pressing against your lungs before the first crack of thunder. That same night, I found something in my cot, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and shaking in my hands. No name, just one sentence written in pencil. North fence, second post, 2 nights from now. Run. That was it. But it was enough. Someone else was alive in there. Someone else was planning. I read that note so many times I memorized the fibers, and then I burned it with a candle stub so no one would ever find it. I waited 2 nights like it said. I didn't eat, didn't speak. My stomach was raw with nerves and fear and something else I couldn't name, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. God, it hurt to feel that again. I dressed in silence, tied my hair back, and slipped out the dormitory window just after midnight. My feet hit the dirt like they remembered how to run. The air was thick with humidity and the copper sting of prayer oil. But I moved fast, like my body had never belonged to them. I found the fence, north side, second post, and I saw her, Ruth, not a ghost, not a memory, a real girl with a flashlight between her teeth and bolt cutters in her hands. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "You actually came," she whispered. I nodded, too stunned to speak. She worked the cutters fast. "We've got 10 minutes, maybe less. There's a path through the woods. I left you shoes. You remember how to run?" I didn't answer. I just started running. We didn't speak as we crashed through the trees. Branches scratched my face, thorns bit my ankles, but I didn't stop. Not once. I didn't even cry. Because for the first time in years, my tears weren't fear. They were freedom. We made it to a highway, a real one. Ruth flagged down a trucker with her arms wide, like she wasn't afraid to die anymore. He pulled over, rolled down the window. "Trouble?" he asked. "Just the kind that needs driving away from," Ruth said. He looked at us, 2 barefoot girls covered in mud and dried blood, and nodded. "Get in." I didn't even ask where we were going. Anywhere was better than there. Anywhere was 1 mile closer to Thomas. And suddenly, I believed he might still be out there, because something in me was still alive, still reaching. And maybe, just maybe, he was reaching too. The trucker's name was Hank. He didn't ask too many questions, which made me trust him. Maybe it was the way he passed us a water bottle without looking sideways, or how he turned down the radio like silence was a form of respect. Ruth sat beside me in the back seat, arms crossed tight, face hard as flint. But when we hit the state line and crossed into Kentucky, she let out a breath that sounded like it had been sitting in her lungs for years. That's when I finally asked, "How did you get out?" She didn't answer right away, just stared out the window, fingers trembling. Then she said, "I stopped praying." It sounded simple, but I understood what she meant. She didn't mean she'd stopped believing. She meant she stopped obeying, stopped hoping, stopped waiting for a rescue, and became her own. Hank dropped us off at a gas station near Bowling Green. gave us $40 from his glove box, and said, "This world's ugly, but you girls ain't. Don't let anyone twist that again." I never saw him after that. We spent the next few days hiding, church basements, women's shelters, behind dumpsters when no one would take us in. Ruth got sick, feverish and cold at night, so I sat up holding her, rocking back and forth like I had seen my mother do before the bottle took her warmth. I thought about turning myself in, going to the police. But how do you tell them what really happened? That your body was taken as offering, that your mother let it happen in the name of God, that you bled for holiness, that you weren't the only one. We needed proof, and we had nothing but scars and silence. So we kept moving. Ruth wanted to go north, said she had cousins in Cincinnati who might help. I didn't ask questions, just followed, because I didn't have a plan anymore. Not really. Only one thought remained: find Thomas. He'd promised. He said he'd come back. And I still believed, in the same fragile, pitiful way children believe the sun rises for them. We made it to the city, no money, no IDs, no voices anyone believed. I tried looking up music venues, youth shelters, anywhere someone might have heard of a boy named Thomas Bishop with a guitar and a dream. Most people shrugged, some sneered. One man said, "Too many like him come through. Most don't last." That one stuck with me. Most don't last. Was Thomas one of them? Was he lying in some alley, bones under cardboard, the music rotting in his fingers? Or had he made it big, forgot the girl with braids and bare feet, standing in the dust waiting for rescue? Ruth told me to let him go. She said it gently, like someone easing a splinter out of skin. But I couldn't, not yet, because holding on to him meant I hadn't disappeared, meant someone once saw me as worth saving, and I needed that to be true. We found a shelter that took us in for a while, said we could stay 3 nights, maybe longer, if we cleaned and kept quiet. I was good at both. I scrubbed bathrooms until my hands blistered, stacked cans in pantries, learned how to disappear in daylight. Ruth started writing in a little notebook she kept under her mattress. She said she was keeping records, said one day someone would need to know what they did to us. I didn't write. Not yet, I was still erasing. But late one night in the shelter's TV room, I heard it. A song. Familiar. Finger-picked guitar, soft chords that hung in the air like breath. I turned toward the screen. There, on a grainy local access show, sat a man in his 30s, dark hair, tired eyes, singing into a dusty microphone. And just before the song ended, the host leaned in and asked, "What's your name, son?" And he smiled, soft and crooked, and said, "Thomas Bishop." I didn't cry. I ran. Out the door, into the street, barefoot on cold pavement, Ruth shouting behind me. Because after 6 years, he was alive. He was real. And now I just had to find him. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the curb outside the shelter with my knees pulled tight to my chest, replaying the sound of his voice over and over in my mind. 6 years hadn't stolen it. Not entirely. There was wear, sure, and a heaviness I hadn't known before. But underneath the years and miles and missed birthdays, it was him, my Thomas. I remembered how we used to lie in the grass behind the barn, the stars poking holes through the dark, and he'd hum that same melody before sleep took us. I thought he'd forgotten. I thought I had. But he hadn't. He remembered too. In the morning, I went back inside, hair tangled, feet numb, face like paper. Ruth was waiting, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I know where I'm going." Finding him wasn't easy. The TV station wouldn't give me much. Just a name and a general area, East Nashville, Music Row. Said he played open mics at some bar called the Blue Boot on Tuesdays. That was 4 days away. So I waited. Again. But this time, the waiting wasn't hollow. It had shape, a name, a destination. I worked odd jobs during the day, washing dishes, hauling boxes, once even sweeping a church floor. That last one nearly broke me. Every hymn echoed like a scream down my spine. I had to leave before communion started. Ruth didn't follow me to Nashville. She stayed behind in Cincinnati, said she had people now, said she'd be safer not running anymore. We hugged at the Greyhound station. She handed me the little notebook she used to write in. "You'll need it," she said, "even if you think you don't." And then she kissed my forehead like a sister and walked away without looking back. I got to Nashville with $13, 2 shirts, and a heart that didn't know whether to run or collapse. I waited outside the Blue Boot 2 hours early, stomach in knots, fingers shaking. And then, just before dusk, he pulled up in a dusty old pickup, guitar case slung over his shoulder. He looked older, broader in the chest. There were lines around his mouth now, and a limp in his right leg I didn't remember. But it was him, my brother, Thomas. He walked right past me, didn't recognize me, Paul. Of course he didn't. So I stood, heart thudding, voice barely there, and whispered, "Thomas?" He paused, turned. His eyes scanned me, confused. Then something in his face shifted, slow, like a curtain being drawn. "Lorna?" he said, barely audible. I nodded, couldn't speak. And that's when it broke. The space between us, the years, the lies, the waiting. He dropped the guitar, didn't care that it hit the pavement. He grabbed me like he'd lost me underwater. Like if he didn't hold tight, I'd vanish again. "I thought you were dead," he said into my shoulder. "I was," I whispered, "but I came back." We sat in the alley behind the bar for an hour. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and offered me one. I said no, not because I didn't want it, but because I was afraid I'd throw up. He told me his side, the way he left Dawson Hollow thinking I'd follow soon after. How he wrote letters that always came back unopened. How Mama told people I'd gone to some retreat for sinners and couldn't be contacted. He thought I'd chosen it, that I'd wanted the church, that I didn't want him. And I told him the truth, all of it, the curtain, the oil, the nights, the blood. I spoke until my voice cracked. He didn't interrupt once. When I was done, he didn't cry. He shook, like the truth was a poison he'd swallowed without realizing. Then he said the thing I hadn't let myself hope for. "You're coming with me," I laughed. Dry, crooked. "You're 6 years too late." He looked at me and said, "Then I'll spend the next 60 making up for it." And for the first time, I believed him. We didn't go back to Dawson Hollow. Not then. Not ever, if I'm being honest. Thomas said he burned every bridge on his way out. Some to survive, some just to watch the fire. The idea of returning, even for closure, was like asking a man to put his head back in the noose just to check if it still fits. Instead, we stayed in Nashville. He had a one-room flat over a pawn shop on Jefferson Street. No air conditioning, no hot water, and the pipes moaned like they were haunted. But it was safe, and it was his. And for a while, that was enough. He brought me coffee every morning, cheap stuff, burnt and bitter, but he always added 2 sugars and a splash of milk, like I used to take it when I was little. I never told him I drank it black now. I just sipped it slow and watched the light move across the cracked window pane. Some mornings, I felt like I was still waiting. Only now I didn't know what for. Thomas didn't ask me to talk. Not anymore. After that first night in the alley, he seemed to understand that grief doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it lives in silence, in how you flinch at doorways, in the way you can't sleep unless every light is off or every light is on. In the way your hands shake when someone says, "Pastor," even if they mean it harmless. He tried to make things normal. Took me to diners, introduced me to friends who worked odd jobs in music or construction. Once, he brought home a puppy. Just showed up with it under his coat like some back alley magician. "It looked lonely," he said. I knew he meant me. We named her Sparrow because she was small, because she sang when she slept. But healing isn't linear. I learned that fast. Some days I woke up ready to breathe. Others, I couldn't leave the bed. Once, Thomas found me curled under the kitchen table, crying because I'd dropped a jar of preserves. The sound of the glass shattering had sent me straight back to the chapel, to the way the curtain rings used to screech when they pulled it open. He didn't speak, just sat beside me on the floor until the sobs ran dry. Then he handed me a broom, not to clean up, to hold, to feel something solid, to remind me that I was here, alive. That winter was the coldest I'd ever known, not in temperature, but in memory. The snow came hard and early. Ice crusted over the windows. My nightmares got worse, but so did my anger, and that, strangely, helped. It gave me shape again. Voice, fire. I started writing in Ruth's notebook. 1 sentence a day at first, then 2, then pages. Stories I remembered. Names, dates, what they did, what they took. It hurt, but it also healed. One night, I told Thomas I wanted to go to the police. He didn't blink, just asked, Do you want me there when you do?" I nodded. He said, "Then we'll go tomorrow." And we did. The detective's office was warm. Overheated, actually. I was sweating through my sleeves, hands damp, voice thin. I expected them to laugh, or doubt, or call me crazy. But they didn't. They listened. And when I pulled out Ruth's notebook, full of trembling lines and bruised ink, the woman across from me put her pen down and said, "This is going to help more people than you know." That was the first time I felt like I hadn't just survived. I'd done something with it. It didn't all happen at once. There were interviews, depositions, courtrooms with stale air and tired eyes. Some of the cleansed came forward too, people I'd thought were long gone. One even brought pictures. Another brought bones. They dug up the chapel, literally. There were graves we never knew about, names we'd forgotten, children no one had looked for. Reuben was arrested in Ohio, running another fellowship. He didn't fight the charges, not really. Just sat there in court with that same smug look, like he thought God would part the ceiling and smite us all for daring to speak. But nothing came. No thunder, no fire, just the sentence. Life, no parole. Mama wasn't at the trial. She died 3 years earlier. I found out through a cousin who still lived near Dawson Hollow. Said she drank herself into a coma, that she whispered verses even in sleep, that her hands were always cold. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything. Grief, when it comes that late, feels like a neighbor you barely knew asking for sugar. You hand them a cup, close the door, and forget they were ever there. It took 5 more years before I let myself use the word free. Even now, it catches in my throat sometimes. But I am free of the chapel, of Reuben, of waiting. I still live near Nashville. Different house, though, a little place with a porch and too many wind chimes. Thomas lives 2 blocks away. We see each other every Sunday, not for church, for pancakes. He brings his guitar. Sometimes he plays. Sometimes I sing. And when the wind presses too hard against the windows, I light a candle, hold Sparrow in my lap, and whisper one word into the quiet. Here, because I am, finally, fully, here, and I didn't come back from the dead to be silent anymore. It took me a long time to stop thinking of myself as broken. Even longer to stop apologizing for surviving. There's something people don't tell you about trauma. Not really. They say time heals and you're strong, like the pain is a mountain you can just climb over if you lace your boots tight enough. But they don't talk about how it lingers in the small things, how a song can gut you, how a hallway with bad lighting can feel like a trap, how someone saying obedience too casually can make your whole body forget where and when it is. I didn't want pity, I still don't, but I wanted someone to know the difference between surviving and living, because they're not the same, and I was ready to live, really live. So I started small. I joined a support group for former cult members, sat in a folding chair every Thursday night, with a paper cup of coffee that always tasted faintly of dust. At first, I just listened, watched others twist their stories out like rope, frayed, complicated, half-broken. There was a woman named Esther who had spent a decade in a doomsday commune in Arizona. A man named Kyle who had been raised as the second son in a group that worshipped light and punished dreams. And then there was me, the girl behind the curtain who became a ghost. One night, I brought Ruth's notebook, passed it around the circle with trembling hands. No one said a word until it came back to me. Then Esther, who hadn't smiled once in 4 meetings, leaned over and said, This is gospel." And I felt it crack open inside me, not pain, pride. I started volunteering at the women's shelter. Not the one Ruth and I had stayed in, but another across town. I cleaned floors, fixed tea, sat on the edges of cots, holding the hands of girls with eyes like mine used to be, hollow, searching, afraid. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to say, "I believe you." That sentence is a life raft. You'd be amazed what it can carry. Thomas kept playing music, got gigs more regularly, opened for a few smaller acts. His songs got softer, sadder, but somehow warmer too, like he wasn't writing from wounds anymore, but from the scars, from the healing. He never married, never said why. But once, over breakfast, he looked at me and said, "I spent so many years looking for you, I forgot how to be with anyone else." I told him, "You can still learn." He smiled. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just good at waiting too." We laughed, and it didn't hurt anymore. One spring I went back to Dawson Hollow. Not to stay, just to see. The town was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just taller now. The chapel was gone, burned to the ground by some lightning strike, they said. Funny how nature sometimes finishes what justice starts. All that was left was the foundation and a few melted hymnals half buried in weeds. I stood at the edge of it for a long time, said nothing, lit no candle, left no flowers, just stood. Then I spit into the dirt. Not out of rage, I didn't have much of that left. It was more of a punctuation mark. A way of saying you didn't win. I found Ruth again, too. After almost a decade, I tracked her down through an old contact from the group. She was living in Chicago, working as a legal advocate for survivors of religious abuse. Had a girlfriend named Max who made her laugh like I'd never seen. Her hair was short now, her spine straighter, her voice strong. When she saw me, she didn't cry. She hugged me hard and said, "You made it." I said, "So did you." We stayed up half the night in her apartment, swapping old memories like cards, the funny ones mostly, the little rebellions, the way we used to sneak cloves into the kitchen for flavor, or how we'd hum old rock songs under our breath during prayer hour. Ruth told me she still has the bracelet, the one she lost under her cot. She'd found it in a thrift store 2 years after we escaped. Said it was fate. I said no, it was you. She said no, Lorna, it was us, and I believed her. The next morning, I woke early, looked out over the city skyline, and thought, this isn't what I thought freedom would look like. And that was the gift. It was better, because freedom wasn't a rescue, it was a choice. 1,000 choices made every single day, to speak, to stay, to walk away, to try again, to live. And I was finally, fully doing it, without waiting, without permission, without fear, just me, Lorna May Bishop, 68 years old, and more alive than I'd ever been. People ask me sometimes, the brave ones, the ones who read the articles or saw the interviews, they ask, how did you survive all that? I never have a good answer. Some days I say luck. Some days I say Ruth. Some days I just smile and say, I didn't. Because the girl I used to be, barefoot on a splintered porch, eyes turned down, heart cupped in her brother's promise, she didn't make it. Not whole anyway. Pieces of her are scattered across years I can't get back. But I carried her. I carry her still. In the way I hum to myself when I'm nervous, in the way I check door locks twice, in the way I sleep with the window cracked just enough to feel the wind, like I'm still listening for someone to come back. I never stopped being that girl entirely, but I became something more, because survival isn't staying the same. It's changing without letting them take the part of you that matters most. The part that dreams, the part that reaches, the part that believes. A few years ago, I was asked to speak at a university, some sociology department doing a series on closed communities and cult psychology. I didn't want to. Public speaking still makes my hands sweat, but I said yes, because someone out there might be sitting in the dark the way I was, waiting for a voice that sounds like theirs. When I stepped up to the podium, the mic squeaked, the lights were too bright, and the professor introduced me like I was something holy. But I wasn't. I'm not. I'm just Lorna. And when I opened my mouth, I didn't start with facts. I started with a promise. My brother once told me he'd come back for me. I waited 18 years. And when he finally did, I wasn't the same girl he left behind, but I was still worth saving. You could hear the breath in the room catch. And then I told them everything, not because I wanted pity. Afterward, a girl barely out of high school came up to me, said her mother was in something like the cleansed, that she wanted to leave but didn't know how. I gave her Ruth's old notebook, the original, pages faded and full of blood and fire. Told her, start here, write it down, every name, every rule, every bruise. It's not just memory, it's evidence, it's power. She cried. I held her. It felt like passing a torch, and I think Ruth would have been proud. Thomas still plays music, still sings at that same bar, though his sets are shorter now. And he sits more than he stands. His hands ache when it rains, and his voice has deepened into something worn and warm, like an old coat. I sit front row most Tuesdays. Sometimes I bring Sparrow, though she's slower now, gray around the muzzle. We're both old girls with scars and soft bellies, but we're here. One breath at a time, one note, one truth. And if someone were to ask me now, what would you say to the girl you were? I think I'd sit beside her on that porch, lace my fingers through hers, and whisper, "He comes back. You come back. And the fire doesn't get the last word. You do. You always do."